Good evening. I want to thank Rabbi Lauren for that really lovely introduction. I want to give a shout out to Susan Hoffinger, her congregant, who put us together about a year ago. I want to thank Judith Rosenbaum from JWA and the Can We Talk podcast. I want to thank Mick Moore and Monica for amplifying this very significant event in Jewish life. So, 2 years before my bat mitzvah, I dressed up as a bar mitzvah boy. It was Purim, 1975. I counted back, I think, if I'm right, it was 47 years ago. I wore a red blouse with an oversized collar, tucked into chocolate brown Levi corduroys. I dug a wrinkled yarmulke stamped with a distant cousin's name and bar mitzvah date out of my father's dresser drawer and bobby pinned it to my head. I magic marked blue stripes on white cloth and cut fringe into its end for a prayer shawl. With a silver goblet fashioned out of Reynolds wrap, I was good to go. I cannot tell you why I felt compelled to cross-dress, so to speak, to represent a Jew coming of age in the mid-70s. I certainly knew girls who had become bat mitzvah, including my own older sister. I suspect that in my fifth grade eyes, boys were the real Jews, and girls dressed up to pretend they were. Boys got to have their ceremonies on Saturday mornings and participate in the Torah service with authentic talitot and kippot with their own names on them. Girls who received the very same education as those boys were relegated to Friday nights when the sacred scroll typically remained in its holy ark out of our reach. If only that fifth grader dressed as a boy had known that girls just like her had sparked a gender revolution that began in fits and starts but transformed Jewish life forever. Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, as you know, introduced the bat mitzvah ceremony for his daughter Judith on March 18, 1922, 2 years after women won the vote in this country, at this very congregation, known at the time aptly as the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, and today is known as SAJ, Judaism that stands for all. He often quipped that Judith was the first of 4 reasons for his doing so, the other 3 being her younger 3 sisters. On a sunny Shabbat morning, beneath a sky colored like the stripes of the future Israeli flag, Judith remembered walking to shul with, as she said, father, mother, disapproving grandmothers, and her 3 little sisters to the brownstone, where the society held all its functions. Back in the day, SAJ met down the block at 41 West 86th, the former home of the songwriter George M. Cohan of Yankee Doodle Dandy and Give My Regards to Broadway fame. The front room, formerly a formal dining room, was outfitted as a makeshift sanctuary with a bima and an ark and was reserved for men only. In the larger room at the rear, men and women sat together, but Judith was forced to sit in the front room. As she said years later, women's rights or no women's rights, the old habit of separating the sexes at worship died hard. The Shabbat morning service hummed along and at its usual pace, and then, as Judith recalled, Father was called up for the honor of reading the Maftir, the concluding section of the weekly Torah portion, and then the Haftarah. Once the Holy Scroll was rolled up and safely secured, Judith was permitted to make her debut. She recited the standard blessings of an aliyah, but read a selection chosen by her father the night before from her own Chumash, a printed Bible. Of course, there was Kiddush after the services, though modest. Judith said her father disapproved of splashy affairs. Congregants munched on gefilte fish and kichels that her aunt had made by the hundreds. At the party back at the Kaplan home that evening, rugelach, tea, and Judith's favorite, hot dogs, were served.
While bat mitzvah was radical in its day, Rabbi Kaplan never intended bat mitzvah to be bar mitzvah's equal. Whereas bar mitzvah was a gateway to full and regular participation in Jewish worship for boys, bat mitzvah was a dead end. After the ceremony, everything was expected to snap back into place as the girl resumed her secondary status in the Jewish community. But something unexpected happened along the way. As hundreds followed in Judith's footsteps, girls began to expect and even demand to do what boys did. Sparks began to fly at SAJ in 1945, when post-bat mitzvah girls petitioned to carry the Torah. They believed they were at least as strong as, they said, those old men who were allowed to march with the scrolls on Simchat Torah. After winning that battle, they set their sights on regular ritual honors. What was the point, they said, of all that religious training if the bat mitzvah ceremony was one and done? In all but the most traditional settings, girls not only gained parity with boys and men, but spurred grown women to do the same. Women sought positions on synagogue boards and pushed to be counted in a minyan. Remarkably, when Sally Prisan became the first female rabbi in America in 1972, and we have historic firsts as well with Rabbi Sandy Sasso in the Reconstructionist movement in 1974, when those two women became rabbis, they had girls half their age to thank for paving the way. As bat mitzvah became well established by the 70s, women and men who had missed it as adolescents, either because they opted out, or it wasn't an option, or they had converted to Judaism, felt inspired by their own daughters to come of age as adults. In less than 100 years, the blink of an eye in the long Jewish past, bat mitzvah girls pushed the heavy needle of history forward. Paradoxically, I argue, their innocuity was their superpower. Cloaked in seemingly girlish innocence, their participation became acceptable to Jews in the pews. Marilyn Moskowitz told me that her 1953 bat mitzvah was an experiment to see whether girls could be counted. After her bat mitzvah, she said, they began to count 2 women for each man in a minyan, and then eventually went 1-to-1. Margie Tarmy Berkowitz told me that her Zeta marveled that she could become bar mitzvahed, as he put it, and afterwards he never stopped asking her to chant for him. Grandfathers everywhere, along with their sisters and their cousins and their aunts, suspended their disbelief in the face of all that girl power. And the girls themselves internalized that power. After Betsy Ravitch Chase became the first bat mitzvah girl in the state of Vermont in 1952, she said she felt entitled to take her place in the Jewish community as a member and as a leader. While girls at the cringy age of 12 or 13 stepped into the spotlight and sparked a revolution in Jewish life over the course of the 20th century, gender-expansive kids are now bringing us into the next phase of the revolution as they upend old categories. But how do you shake gender out of a rite that marks either a Jewish girl becoming a woman or a Jewish boy becoming a man? The responses are as creative as they are diverse. Soren and Claire Barnett did it twice. They became bat mitzvah as a 13-year-old at a synagogue in 2011, and then bar mitzvah 5 years later after changing their pronouns to they and their and taking the name Soren on a birthright trip in Israel in 2016. Ruby Marks, who uses feminine pronouns but doesn't feel like a boy or girl, stood before her community as its first gender-neutral B-mitzvah in 2019, and I understand here at SAJ, you have already adopted that custom. Tomorrow night, at Shabbat services across the country, we will celebrate or continue the celebration as we start tonight of Bat Mitzvah Centennial. I will give thanks to gutsy Judith Kaplan who stepped into the spotlight and drove a nail into the coffin of Jewish patriarchy. I will sing the praises of women who found courage in their daughter's example to become bat mitzvah in middle age or beyond, and also gain access, equal access, to that of men. And I will salute non-binary teens who are shaping the next iteration of the Jewish coming-of-age ceremony. And you know what? Next year for Purim, I think I'll dress up as Judith Kaplan.